Welcome to the Jeff Crilley Show. And now, here's Jeff Crilley.
Welcome back to the Jeff Crilley Show. Our hearts are heavy this week because of the massacre in Orlando. A woman has been doing her part from North Texas to help with the healing in Orlando. Veronica Sites, she is a grief counselor. She's a conflict resolution expert. Her website is conflictresolutionspeaker.com. Welcome to the Jeff Crilley Show, Veronica.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Yeah. Well, this has been a very busy week for you. You've been doing a lot of interviews and helping a lot of people cope with this because the grieving is not just in Orlando. I mean, I think the whole nation is in mourning. Wouldn't you agree?
It's nationwide, and I've gotten so many calls from across the nation for various things. It's all devastating. What has made it more complex is the compound effect of complexity of one tragedy Friday night, another Sunday night, another on Tuesday night. It's a messy situation. So yes, the entire nation is feeling it.
Well, I know there are stages of grief. There's kind of like shock and denial. Where would you say the survivors are right now? Are they still numb?
Many of them probably are. Until the last person is released from the hospital, the community, the sub-community of those that were injured are now, they're exactly that. They are a sub-community within all of those that were directly in the club. So until the last one is released, there is an empathy of grief that is a different level to anyone that is the family member. It's unique to what the community's feeling. And the advocate in each one of the victims is rallying for, because they're very, not, I don't even want to say they, but in a situation like this,
right,
it's very common for survivor one to experience survivor guilt and be operating in a mode of other-centric advocacy. So they're rallying for somebody else, and there's that place where they may not have allowed themselves to feel,
right,
because the survivor guilt tells you that you shouldn't feel this way, and yet there is a risk of neglecting self-care while they're advocating for someone else that at this point may not be where they are in the process of healing or wound care.
I know there are countless books on this subject talking about the 5 stages of grief, and there might actually be more. But is it healthy to go through all 5? Can you skip a step, or does that do harm? Does it come back later?
You know, there are a lot of resources out there, and we use the word stages because that's nice and neat. And if we think about it maybe like as a staircase, it would be I'm moving up in the progress. But it's not cut and dry like that. There's phases, and there's, you may move one step forward, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you're just in a sea of grief, and you don't know why or what. They're phases, and if we can imagine, many of us have seen the elastic rubber band ball. That's just all these little rubber bands. If each one of those rubber bands with a different color, and each color represented a different emotion.
Mm-hmm.
You can pull on any one of those, and they're all going to be impacted. So it's not as cut and dry, and it's more about what the individual has experienced before this traumatic event that will impact how they cope and move forward.
Sometimes we don't even think about the first responders or even journalists covering a story.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've got a job to do, so you really almost have to stuff whatever emotions you have down in order to complete the job. Let's talk about that. What are the first responders going through right now?
Fortunately, for a lot of first responders, it's part of the job requirement because of the nature of work that they do, that they would be required as a aftercare or after the event to have a debriefing. I volunteer as a law enforcement chaplain, so I have responded to many a responder. And the same is for EMTs, firefighters. It's not that way across the board for everyone. I worry about the journalists because I have had many a conversation, and because of the fact that it's really not considered as a potential risk of mental health and wellness. I've seen it. I've experienced it. I watch the reporters when I'm interviewed. I hear it in their voices. And because news is the nature of the industry, we move on to the next story and don't take time for the self-care. Therefore, it's very similar. You and I talked earlier this week. It's very similar to having a 20-ounce soda bottle. It's all shaken up and nobody ever deals with, but something comes along and it's opened up, and it can be messy if you haven't dealt with it.
Well, you were telling me a story off the air of a journalist that contacted you from the Orlando area, and
Yes.
you got an opportunity to do a little counseling with her, and that wasn't exactly the reason for the call, but you found yourself, ministering to her pain. Talk about that.
Exactly. And I look for those moments to seize, because I have to actively listen through the whole process. And again, that other-centric position that she was taking from the frame of a journalist wanting to contribute to the papers that she does, just shared, my story is going to be about hitting close to home, but I really am not sure why this hits so close to home for me. And then just shared some personal information that I was able to, let's lay it out here. Here's why it hits close to home. And it has to do with the relationships we have with people, our neighbors. We are either related in a relationship, or maybe we're a happenstance come and go. But seize those moments is what I say.
Well, let's talk about the nation as a whole, because while this event happened so far away from Dallas, Texas, you can't be near a TV set without seeing that pain and taking it in, can you?
You can't. And one of them is because marketing media is so good at what it does. We have accepted, we've believed, and we've held on to hoping, parents dream of taking their children to Disney World and to the various entertainment centers that are there, different theme parks. There is an attachment of hope and fantasy that has got us at a place that the majority of people somewhere, if they don't believe it, they've heard it. It's one of the happiest places on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that that's something that I had heard, and I thought, well, it's a great place, and it is. Yet the tragedies that have happened there have dispelled that for people. So it's shattered a perception, and it's changed a perspective. If you can't be, you just fill in the blank. If you can't be there, if you can't be doing this, if you can't be, enjoying, various events, you can fill in the blank with anybody. Right. And we can all relate in the sense that there's nobody that, and this sounds a little ludicrous, but there's nobody that hasn't been a child. And that child looked to, a grown-up, a parent, a caregiver for that stability, that sense of security. Mm-hmm. Well, those things were shattered in one place in less than 1 week times 3 times, extremely traumatically.
Yes. I know sometimes you're hired by individuals, and sometimes you're hired by organizations. Mm. Talk a little bit about your work. How is it that people hire you?
Well, I do coaching, and I a lot of times people call me in for business coaching, and I just let them know, while I am a conflict resolution speaker, all outer conflict has to do with some inner conflict. So I screen and qualify, who is the person that's ready to work, because what I do is I help them move out of their own way. There's been a lot of talk right now, Jeff, that there's a real concern, and there's a risk as well that many of the survivors are going to, progress to a place of PTSD. What I do as a responder is we deal with critical incident stress management. The disorder is a manifestation of a lot of neglect of care, or maybe not following through, or maybe not knowing what to do to take the best care of you. It's a progression. If we don't deal with stress on the front end and have healthy steps, measures, and directions, it can turn into a pattern. If that pattern isn't behavioral, but it is an emotional and psychological, it can continue to escalate or cycle to a place that it becomes, any manifestation, depression, chronic fatigue. And that's one of the things that, I have a lot of people that hire me for, I've been dealing with depression or chronic fatigue. I don't know what to do. So people hire me to figure out what are the things that can be done. And what I do as a professional is I take a look at, through assessment, let's take a look at the incidents that have touched your life, and let's figure out how they've been dealt with, moved past, stuffed, ignored, denied, just passed off. And when people are willing to look, I call it the 3 M's. There's mirroring, there's mentoring, and there's modeling. My life is a model of overcoming depression. And that is in spite of and not as a result of responding. It's just I had to take the steps and measures. So imagine hiring a fishing guide. He knows where the fish are. He knows how to, what the lures are to catch these things. And so people hire me as a guide to help them with the evidence that it's possible.
And if the healing is not done, if an employee is emotionally broken, they're going to seek relief in other places. Sometimes it might be alcohol or drugs. It's really something that needs to be addressed, isn't it?
It is. And, HR people are a wonderful group for me to talk to, because one of the things that we can see in the workplace is if you're the owner, if you're the, CEO, you're going to see it in the bottom line, the profit margins, the P&L reports are going to show something's going on. You can narrow it down to a department and then, narrow it down to maybe a group of people. But the thing is, when the care is not given, people self-medicate. When people self-medicate, they miss work. When they miss work on a regular basis, you see patterns.
Wow. This is such an amazing segment. Thank you for coming on my show.
Thank you.
ConflictResolutionSpeaker.org is her
.com
is her website. Thanks again, and that's this week's show.
Thank you.